Alice Morgan lost everything in one day. Her husband, Thomas, and 8-year-old daughter, Bella, went on an innocent sailing trip, a cruise to the Caribbean. But on the morning of the third day, the ship sent out a distress call. 2 people were missing, no trace, no explanation. Alice Morgan still remembered the taste of salt on her lips and the warm caress of sun on her skin as she boarded the majestic cruise liner, the Sapphire Queen, with her husband Thomas and their bright, 8-year-old daughter Bella. For months leading up to the trip, their days had been filled with laughter and hope. Alice, a gentle, determined woman whose resilient spirit had carried her through many hardships, had clung to the promise of new beginnings. Thomas, ever the steady anchor in her life, had planned this journey as a celebration of their love and a much-needed escape from the burdens of everyday struggles. And little Bella, with her sparkling eyes and infectious giggles, was the living embodiment of hope and innocence. The days at sea were nothing short of magical. The ship sailed gracefully through the glistening Caribbean waters, each sunrise and sunset painting the sky with hues of gold, pink, and violet. Mornings were spent marveling at the endless horizon from the ship's deck, where Alice would hold Bella's tiny hand as they watched Thomas wave joyfully to other passengers. Evenings brought sumptuous feasts, where laughter mingled with soft melodies from a live band, and the gentle hum of conversation under the glimmer of crystal chandeliers turned every dinner into a cherished memory. There was genuine warmth aboard the Sapphire Queen, a sense of family among strangers, where every guest was welcomed with a smile and every moment seemed infused with promise. As the cruise progressed, Alice took countless photos to capture the sparkling moments. Bella building sandcastles on secluded beaches during shore excursions, Thomas sharing playful banter with fellow travelers, and the 3 of them embraced in the glow of a tropical sunset. Their plans for the future were as vivid as the turquoise sea, with promises to travel more, to nurture the fleeting moments of happiness, and to never let life's hardships dim their inner light. It seemed, for those few blissful days, that everything was right in the world. However, fate can be as unpredictable as the tides. On the morning of the third day, while the liner sailed smoothly through calm waters, an unexpected alarm shattered the serenity. Without warning, the ship's intercom crackled to life with a signal that sent shivers down every spine. There had been a critical malfunction in the surveillance system, and 2 persons on board had vanished without a trace. Panic rippled through the passengers and crew alike. For a moment, no one fully grasped the gravity of those words, until whispers of disbelief grew into frantic questions. Had someone fallen overboard? Was there foul play behind the pristine facade of the cruise? In the ensuing chaos, officials announced that the cameras in the public areas of the ship had inexplicably gone offline during the precise window when the disappearance occurred. There were no security tapes, no eyewitness accounts from that hour, only an acrid trail of unanswered questions. For Alice, that moment was like a sudden, heart-wrenching betrayal by destiny itself. One minute, she had been relishing the warmth of family joy, and the next, she was plunged into a nightmare. Thomas and Bella, her beloved husband and cherished daughter, had been among those declared missing. In the ensuing hours of desperate search on board, the once vibrantly festive atmosphere gave way to muted mourning and frantic investigation. Despite every effort by the ship's crew, the search parties combed the decks and lower levels in vain. The gentle sounds of the Caribbean were replaced by echoes of heavy footsteps, hushed voices, and the pervasive dread of loss. As news of the disappearance began to filter out through the cruise liner's labyrinth of corridors, panic spread like wildfire among the other passengers. Rumors and speculations ran rampant. Some whispered of possible abduction, others muttered about a tragic accident. But the truth remained elusive, locked away by a failure in modern technology. A glaring gap in security that rendered the once promising voyage into a scene of inexplicable horror. Amid the turmoil, Alice's heart shattered. The woman who had believed that love and hope could mend even the deepest scars now felt the cold sting of abandonment. In that single fateful day, she lost not only her family, but also the semblance of a normal life she'd worked so hard to rebuild. In the days that followed, Alice was tormented by a relentless cycle of grief and confusion. How could a day have robbed her of her entire world? The official investigation launched by the cruise authorities offered little comfort. A combination of system glitches, suspicious oversight, and evasive statements from higher-ups in the company only deepened the mystery. Meanwhile, whispers of a broader conspiracy began to circulate in closed circles. A murmur that, perhaps, influential figures had reason to silence the truth behind the disappearance of Thomas and Bella. Even as the vessel returned to port in a haze of sorrow and scandal, the unanswered questions loomed large, and the injustice of that day seemed to ripple far beyond the confines of a single cruise ship. Yet, even as Alice descended into a long, isolating spiral of depression and relentless bureaucratic investigation, a seed of determination flickered weakly within her. Though she had lost everything in one tragic day, she vowed, deep down, that she would not allow her husband and daughter's story to be buried forever. Unbeknownst to those who had once surrounded her with hollow condolences and bureaucratic indifference, a journey had begun. A quest to uncover the truth behind the vanishing. A quest that would eventually lead her down shadowed alleys and into the depths of a conspiracy that influential powers had fought to keep hidden. 7 years had passed since the fateful day that had shattered Alice Morgan's world. In the wake of that unspeakable loss, when her husband Thomas and 8-year-old daughter Bella vanished without a trace during a once promising Caribbean cruise, Alice had been forced to navigate an existence defined by sorrow, bitterness, and an unyielding search for truth. Today, much of her life was a tapestry of endless nights haunted by memories and investigations that had led only to dead ends and evasive silence. The grief that had once been a single, piercing moment had become a constant companion, an ever-present shadow that followed her through every waking hour. Each day, Alice awoke in a small New York apartment that had become her reluctant refuge. Its modest walls, marked by peeling paint and faded photographs, were a daily reminder of what she had lost. In the quiet hours of early morning, long before the city burst into its usual clamor, she would sit by a window and stare blankly at the street below, trying to reconcile the lingering hope of someday reuniting with her beloved family against the overwhelming weight of despair. The investigations, once driven by a fierce determination to uncover the truth behind that mysterious incident on the Sapphire Queen, had gradually morphed into a painful obsession that left her isolated from the world around her. The official inquiries had offered little solace. In archived court documents, it was recorded that the security cameras on the cruise liner had inexplicably gone offline during the precise interval when Thomas and Bella disappeared, a detail that remained an unanswerable mystery and a source of endless speculation. Rumors had swirled about a possible cover-up, with whispers hinting that influential figures had conspired to bury the truth. But despite numerous appeals, every formal investigation had ultimately led to bureaucratic roadblocks and a conspiracy of silence that left her fighting not only for answers but also for her dignity. The years passed in a haze of depression and subdued anger. Alice learned to blend into the sprawling anonymity of New York City, her days marked by intermittent forays into record offices, old maritime documents, and interviews with former crew members who had reluctantly spoken of strange occurrences at sea. Friends and colleagues, many of whom offered helpless condolences, gradually began to drift away when they realized that her quest for truth was far from over. Her nights became a medley of sleepless hours and mindless retracing of past interviews, while her days were spent in a kind of numb resignation, a slow surrender of herself to grief. On a chill autumn day, with the overcast sky reflecting the heaviness in her heart, Alice decided to take an impromptu walk through one of New York City's bustling neighborhoods. She needed to break free, even if just momentarily, from the confines of her memories. Dressed in a worn leather jacket and a scarf that had seen better days, she ambled along crowded sidewalks, her gaze fixed ahead yet her mind wandering through the corridors of her long-lost past. Every step was a struggle, a negotiation between the desire to forget and the inescapable lure of what might still be uncovered. As she wound her way through the maze of towering buildings and busy storefronts, her path unexpectedly led her down a narrow, dimly lit alley, a place that looked as though it had been forgotten by time amidst the relentless pulse of the city. The alley was lined with aging brick walls, their surfaces marked by layers of peeling posters and the scars of urban decay. It was here, in that forgotten passageway, that Alice almost didn't notice the figure standing near a battered fire escape. At first glance, it was simply a dark silhouette, a man, his long hair falling in soft waves around his shoulders, his posture languid yet strangely purposeful. But as her eyes adjusted to the gentle gloom of the alley, another figure caught her attention. A young girl, no more than 8 or 9, standing a few paces away from the man. What seized Alice's breath, however, was not merely the unexpected presence of these strangers, but an object in the girl's small hands. A faded, time-worn doll that looked disturbingly familiar. Its fabric was frayed, its once cheerful face etched with the patina of long-forgotten joys. And, as if by some subtle and miraculous design, upon the doll's tattered dress, appeared a set of handwritten initials, BM. In that single, heart-stopping moment, time itself seemed to pause. Gasping, Alice's heart thundered in her ears. Bella's initials. Those little characters that had once adorned the doll she clutched in the happy days of her childhood were unmistakably there. The sight was both anachronistic and deeply evocative, an echo from a past that she had believed to be irrevocably lost. The man with the long hair slowly turned his head, his gaze flickering momentarily in the direction of the girl, as if acknowledging an unspoken bond between them. There was nothing overt in his expression, yet for Alice, that fleeting glance spoke volumes, a silent communication that transcended words. It was as if the souls of Thomas and Bella had somehow reached out from across the years to touch her wounded heart. Alice's mind raced as the initial shock gave way to a profound stirring of emotions. Could it be possible that the family she had lost, a family that had vanished without explanation, was in some way still alive? Or was it merely the cruel trick of her grieving imagination? The girl, with her head bowed slightly and clutching the doll as if it were a fragile treasure, began to take a hesitant step forward. And in that step, in the quiet movement of her small hand, lay the promise of answers that had haunted Alice for so long. Uncertain and trembling, Alice hesitated on the edge of the alley, her instincts warring between caution and desperate hope. The city around her continued its indifferent hum, yet in that narrow, overlooked space, a story long suppressed was beginning to unfold anew. Every detail, the dampness of the brick, the murmur of distant traffic, the gentle shift of the tall man's hair in the breeze, and the weight of that unmistakable symbol on the doll, kindled a spark inside her. It was a spark that might illuminate the darkness of her past and, in the process, reveal the conspiracies and hidden truths that had for years conspired to keep her family's fate locked away in silence. For the first time in years, amidst the numb repetition of sorrow and the drudgery of endless investigation, Alice felt her heart stir with a tentative joy, a heart that, though battered, dared to beat with hope once again. Standing at the edge of that forgotten alley and facing the mysterious figures before her, she knew that the journey to uncover the truth was far from over. In that moment, as the old doll's embroidered initials glinted in the soft light, the threads of fate pulled taut once more, promising that the long-hidden secrets of that ill-fated cruise were now ready to be unraveled. Alice stood frozen in that narrow, graffiti-lined alley, her heart pounding in rapid, uneven beats as the mysterious figures began to fade into the distance. The sight of the long-haired man and the little girl clutching the battered doll, bearing Bella's unmistakable initials, had shattered the numb resignation that had anchored her for 7 long years. In that suspended moment, memories of laughter, seaside smiles, and the warmth of her once happy family came rushing back like a tidal wave. The vivid recollections of Thomas's hearty chuckle and Bella's playful giggles merged with a lingering, desperate hope. Could it be possible that a piece of her lost family still lived, hidden somewhere in the vast urban labyrinth of New York? For a heartbeat, Alice hesitated, a mix of incredulity and longing battling within her. The alley, with its peeling posters and dim, flickering streetlight, became the threshold to a past she had buried under layers of grief and unanswered questions. Every rough texture of the brick wall, every scattered piece of forgotten litter, seemed to murmur secrets of lost time. And yet, there was something inherently familiar in the way the little girl held that old doll, as if the cherished toy was a magnet that irresistibly tethered her to a memory from another era. Alice's mind raced. Was this a cruel twist of fate, A trick of her desperate imagination? Or was it an undeniable sign? A clue left behind by the very people whose disappearance had torn her world apart? Driven by a sudden, fierce determination to uncover the truth, Alice stepped back from the safety of the alley's shadowy recesses. Her legs, once heavy with resignation, now thrummed with an urgency fueled by both despair and hope. With trembling hands clutching her coat tighter, she resolved to follow the figures, keeping to the fringes of the bustling city street. She melted into the crowd along the busy sidewalks, her senses heightened as she scanned each passerby for a hint of that familiar figure. Every soft echo of footsteps, every muted conversation, felt laden with clues and unanswered questions. As she discreetly trailed the mysterious duo, Alice's mind wandered back to the unsolved case aboard the Sapphire Queen. The official investigation had fizzled into obfuscation, the cameras on the ship mysteriously failing just when Thomas and Bella vanished, and cryptic notes in the ship's log hinting at a system malfunction that felt all too orchestrated. Now, 7 years later, here in the neon-lit streets of New York, fate was nudging her toward an encounter that might unravel the truth hidden beneath layers of deliberate silence and conspiracy. Every flickering street lamp and echoing subway announcement served as a somber reminder that the city, with all its vibrant chaos, held secrets as deep as the ocean from which her family had disappeared. The man led her through winding side streets and past the pulsing heartbeat of late-night diners and bars, always maintaining a quiet distance. The little girl, holding the doll so close, seemed more fragile than ever, a living relic from a time that had once been filled with promise. As Alice followed them, a cascade of memories flooded her senses. The gentle sound of Bella's laughter during a sunlit beach excursion, the tender moments when Thomas would ruffle Bella's hair, and the comfort of knowing that her family was intact. Those recollections, once dulled by relentless sorrow, shone forth with a fierce, piercing clarity now. And with every step the mysterious figures took, Alice's determination to reclaim the past grew ever stronger. The pursuit was not without its risks. The alleyways of New York were labyrinthine and unpredictable, and the shadows could hide more than just hopeful signs. They could conceal danger. Yet, Alice moved with a cautious resolve, her mind racing through every unlikely possibility. Could these figures be part of a larger web interconnected with the conspiracy that had silenced her pleas all those years ago? Or were they simply victims of circumstance, wandering souls who had somehow survived the tragedy that had befallen her family? Questions tumbled through her thoughts, each one nudging her deeper into a realm of uncertainty that was at once terrifying and strangely invigorating. At one point, she caught a glimpse of them pausing beneath a flickering streetlight outside an old brick building, its windows glowing dimly like secret eyes watching over the night. The little girl's posture, head bowed, clutching the doll with almost desperate care, struck a chord in Alice's heart. In that fraction of a second, the image of Bella's winning smile surfaced unbidden, mingling with the present moment in an almost surreal tapestry. It was as if time had folded in on itself, the joyful past colliding with a mysterious present that promised answers. But this was no ordinary meeting. The lingering energy in the air felt charged with significance. And then, as if sensing she was being watched, the man glanced over his shoulder, his eyes meeting hers for a fleeting second, a moment that sent a shudder along her spine. In that shared glance, silent and full of unsaid words, lay a promise and a warning. The truth was dangerous, and its revelation would come at a cost. Unable to contain herself any longer, Alice ducked into the shadow of an awning, pulling out a small, worn notebook from her bag. In hurried, trembling script, she began jotting down every detail. The precise time she first saw the silhouettes, the location of the flickering streetlight, even the style of the man's long hair and the worn fabric of the doll that had once belonged to her beloved Bella. Every observation was a potential clue, a piece of a puzzle that might finally lead her into the heart of the mystery. Her mind, sharpened by years of relentless investigation and tempered by heartbreak, began to formulate a plan. She would follow these figures discreetly, document every fragment of information, and gradually rebuild the trail that had vanished so abruptly on that ill-fated cruise. As Alice trailed the pair deeper into the urban maze, Doubts began to mingle with resolve. Was she simply chasing ghosts, driven by the persistence of a heart long accustomed to loss? Or was this the correction of fate, a chance to set right the wrongs that had haunted her for so long? The city around her pulsed with life, indifferent to her inner turmoil, while each step further from the familiar beaten path took her closer to an unforeseen confrontation with the past. She silently vowed that no matter what she might uncover, she would press on with the relentless courage of a mother determined to reclaim her family's destiny. In the labyrinthine interplay of dim alley lights and the distant hum of midnight traffic, Alice's footsteps echoed with the promise of discovery. The mysterious figures, with their spectral quality and the lingering aura of secrets, were no longer simply shadows in an urban night. They were the keys to a hidden narrative, one that could finally explain the inexplicable disappearance of Thomas and Bella. And as the night deepened, so too did her resolve. To untangle the skein of conspiracy, to challenge the forces that had conspired to keep her truth hidden for far too long, and to bring her lost family back into the light of day. After days of tireless pursuit across the labyrinthine streets of New York, Alice Morgan eventually discovered an inconspicuous building nestled between a row of aging brick townhouses and a shuttered storefront. The building, with its peeling paint, dim lighting, and heavy metal door, looked as if it had been forgotten by time, a stark contrast to the vibrant bustle outside. Drawn by an inexplicable pull and the promise of answers, Alice hesitated only a moment before pressing her trembling hand to the cold, scarred surface of the door. A soft knock echoed in the quiet passageway, and after a few hesitant seconds, the door creaked open, revealing a narrow foyer dimly lit by a single, flickering overhead bulb. Inside, the atmosphere was heavy with the scent of old wood and dampness, a refuge that bore the marks of years of secret occupancy rather than any intention of comfort. A few sparse chairs and a threadbare sofa were arranged around a low table, and on the walls hung faded photographs and scribbled notices in a language that hinted at clandestine gatherings. As Alice stepped further into the shelter, her eyes slowly adjusted to the low light, and her heart raced with both hope and dread. This sanctuary, hidden in the depths of the city, was reputed to offer a safe haven to those who had been lost, intentionally hidden away from a world that had forgotten them. And now, somehow, it had become the destination for the very figures who had haunted her dreams for the past 7 years. In a far corner of a modest, makeshift living room, slumped on a threadbare sofa with an expression that was at once vacant and pained, sat a man whose strong features she recognized with a jolt. It was Thomas, the man she had loved, the husband who had once filled her days with laughter and companionship. Yet in that moment, Thomas appeared as a specter, his eyes shadowed and distant. His posture was rigid and withdrawn, and his once vibrant voice was now reduced to a heavy, haunting silence. Time had left marks upon him. The warmth that had been his trademark had given way to a quiet, impenetrable severity, as if layers of trauma and enforced isolation had muffled the very essence of his being. A short distance away, in a corner slightly illuminated by a single, sputtering lamp, sat a young girl. At first, Alice's heart seized with both joy and anguish as she recognized the gentle curve of Bella's face. But the little girl, the once vibrant Bella whose laughter had filled sunny days on golden beaches, seemed almost lost in herself. Bella's eyes, once full of playful mischief and wonder, were now distant and glazed, betraying a haunting emptiness. She cradled an old, battered doll in her arms, its fabric worn and eyes lifeless, yet it bore a striking detail that made Alice's blood run cold. Upon its faded dress were carefully embroidered initials, BM, echoing the cherished mark of her beloved daughter. Tears welled in Alice's eyes as she took in the scene. With a trembling voice, she called out softly, "Thomas? Bella?" Her words, laden with decades of grief and hope, hung in the stale air. For several agonizing moments, there was no response, only an oppressive silence that pressed in around her like a cruel reminder of her loss. Thomas's gaze slowly shifted, but his eyes remained void of recognition or warmth. Bella's head turned ever so slightly, as if acknowledging the sound of a familiar voice, but she could not meet her mother's eyes. Instead, She clutched her doll even tighter, her small face etched with confusion and sadness. Desperation mingled with tenderness as Alice stepped forward. She moved cautiously, as if afraid that an abrupt approach might shatter the fragile remnant of her family's presence. "It's me, Alice," she whispered, her voice cracking with emotion. "I'm your wife. I'm your mother." But the responses that followed were not what she had longed for. Thomas only offered a slight, hollow nod, an acknowledgement so faint it nearly went unnoticed, while Bella's eyes remained blank, her features betraying no sign of recognition. It was as though the vibrant, loving souls that had once filled the faces of her husband and daughter had been replaced by strangers living under the shadow of enforced silence and profound disconnection. Around her, the shelter hummed with a quiet intensity. In hushed corners, other residents, men and women whose eyes reflected their own hidden sorrows, murmured softly among themselves. One middle-aged man, his face lined with exhaustion, glanced up as if to question her unexpected appearance. A tearful woman in a worn sweater quickly hushed him, her expression apologetic and guarded. It became apparent that this was not just a refuge, but a carefully constructed safe haven for people who had been touched by mysterious circumstances. The atmosphere carried an undeniable air of regulated secrecy, where every word was measured and every gesture concealed layers of pain. Alice's mind raced as she struggled to reconcile the presence of her family with the transformed, almost alien figures before her. The Thomas that sat on that dilapidated sofa was a shadow of the man she had once known. His laughter was a distant echo, and the familiar firmness in his grip was gone, replaced by a silence that felt imposed, perhaps even engineered. And young Bella, whose tender memories once danced in the light of pure joy, now seemed as if she had been muted by forces beyond her understanding. Had the trauma of that fateful day aboard the Sapphire Queen been so deep as to erase not just physical presence but the very spark of recognition and affection between a mother and her daughter? Stifling a sob, Alice approached Thomas's side, gently reaching out to take his hand. The contact was cool and detached, and he did not respond with the warmth she so desperately craved. Instead, he simply observed her with an expression that might have been regret or resignation. His eyes held a vacant sorrow, as if he were trapped in a limbo from which he could not awaken. Turning toward Bella, Alice attempted to kneel beside the little girl, hoping that a tender word or a familiar lullaby might stir some memory. Yet Bella's gaze remained distant, her small hands clutching the battered doll, as if it were a lifeline to a past she could no longer recall. In that heart-wrenching moment, the painful truth began to take shape before Alice. The shelter was not merely a sanctuary. They were living under its strict, confining conditions, altered by forces unknown. Wordless questions piled upon her mind. Had Thomas been silenced by trauma, or by something more deliberate? Had Bella's memories been tampered with to protect her? Or had they simply faded into a void of loss and neglect? The sterile, oppressive environment of the shelter seemed to murmur dark secrets, hints of a deeper conspiracy that had removed her cherished family from the ordinary course of life. With no immediate answers forthcoming from her loved ones, Alice's anguish gave way to a steely resolve. Even as her heart broke anew at the sight of Thomas's silence and Bella's blank stare, she realized that if she were to reclaim her family, the truth of what had happened on that ill-fated cruise and the forces that had conspired to keep them hidden, she would have to fight not just for answers, but for the very essence of their identities. Somewhere within the bureaucratic shadows of this refuge lurked the story of their abduction, of the deliberate erasure of memories and the extraction of their true selves from the world they once knew. Gently, with tears streaming down her face, Alice vowed that she would not let the indifference of time or the cruelty of conspiracies keep her from uncovering the truth. Taking one last trembling look at Thomas's distant eyes and the vacant gaze of little Bella, she whispered, "I will find you, and I will bring us all back together." In that solemn promise, a spark of defiance lit a fire within her, a determination to dismantle the dark web of silence and deceit that had ensnared her family for far too long. Determined to uncover the truth behind her family's tragic disappearance and their subsequent erasure, Alice resolved to leave no stone unturned. In the days after discovering her husband and daughter at the hidden shelter, she retreated into the night and began a painstaking quest for evidence. The sterile walls of that refuge had whispered dark secrets that demanded to be unraveled, and every fragment of memory, every document, and every faint clue began to take on new importance under her determined gaze. Alice started by revisiting old case files and archived records at municipal offices. She spent long evenings poring over maritime logs and inspection reports from the Sapphire Queen, the cruise liner that once carried so much promise. In the official records, an anomaly leaped out. A conspicuous notation detailing that the ship's security cameras had inexplicably failed during the precise period when Thomas and Bella vanished. The report stated only that technical malfunctions had rendered the footage unavailable, a phrase that now struck Alice as a convenient cover for something far more sinister. Determined to verify the authenticity of these records, she obtained copies of official statements and cross-referenced them with public maritime inspection reports. The discrepancies were subtle, but they were there. A mismatch of timestamps, an unaccounted-for delay in the transmission of routine logs, and a rapid closure of the incident that bordered on silence. Still unsatisfied with bureaucratic explanations, Alice sought out anyone who had once worked on the Sapphire Queen. An old sailor, whom she learned had served on that very ship over a decade ago, suddenly emerged as a vital link in her investigation. His grizzled face and weathered hands testified to a life spent at sea, and despite years of silence after the incident, he agreed to meet her in a quiet corner of a local diner, one that smelt of strong coffee and stale memories. Over a cup of bitter brew, the sailor spoke in hushed tones. He recalled that night vividly. "I remember the cameras on deck went dark, almost as if someone had switched them off deliberately. I knew something wasn't right when I saw a couple of worried looks among the bridge crew. There was a feeling in the air. It wasn't just an electrical fault. It was premeditated." His words, laced with remorse and a tinge of anger, suggested that powerful figures might have been involved. According to him, the shutdown wasn't a mere accident, but possibly a deliberate act to cover up a secret plan. The sailor's story did more than merely corroborate Alice's suspicions. It hinted at a vast network of corruption. He recalled vague whispers among crew members about the figures who managed the ship's finances and security. These murmurs spoke of influential businessmen with far-reaching connections and a penchant for eliminating inconvenient truths. They always seemed to have a way of making things vanish: people, recordings, even memories, he murmured, his eyes clouded with the weight of knowing too much and saying too little. With each carefully chosen word, the old sailor revealed a thread that Alice soon began pulling at with determined fervor. Armed with the sailor's testimony, Alice turned to local law enforcement records and legal documents preserved in dusty archives. She discovered that, in an obscure court file dating back to the day after the disappearance, there had been a hurried deposition concerning unexplained system downtimes on the ship. Even more damning was a secret memo from the cruise line's security department. The memo, hidden away in an overlooked section of the records, suggested that a group of individuals had met on board just before the cameras went dark. Their conversation, filled with coded language about ensuring the package's safe delivery, pointed to a premeditated plan rather than a random technical glitch. The document noted that these figures were persons of interest, but the names were redacted, replaced by initials and cryptic markers. It was as if someone had altered the file to mask the scales of collusion. Alice carefully photocopied every page, whispering to herself that even a small detail could be the key that unlocked this damning conspiracy. Alice didn't stop with documents. She began reaching out to potential witnesses, contacting former crew members and passengers whose memories might still hold fragments of that fateful day. Some, intimidated by the power of the interests involved, remained silent. Others, fearing repercussions, offered only vague recollections. But gradually a pattern emerged. One witness recalled overhearing a conversation about how certain people just disappear when the cameras go out, and another admitted that an unusual number of security personnel had been summoned under a cloak of urgency. These fragmented accounts started forming a mosaic, a tapestry of lies stretched over a meticulously orchestrated cover-up. In a further twist, Alice discovered a peculiar detail from an old newspaper clipping archived online. The headline had read, "Mystery at Sea, Technical Glitch or Covert Operation?" Beneath it, a photograph of the cruise deck showed the exact moment when darkness engulfed the cameras. The caption briefly mentioned unaccounted-for individuals before the story was abruptly cut short. As she deciphered that article's implications, Alice's rage mingled with sorrow, realizing that influential figures had long manipulated the truth to protect their own interests. Was it possible that Thomas and Bella had been mere pawns in a much larger, insidious game? Every discovery fueled her determination. With a battered laptop, a hand-annotated notebook, and stacks of photocopied documents tucked under her arm, Alice began to connect the dots. In the labyrinth of evidence, she saw the outline of a dark conspiracy that stretched back to influential circles. Powerful individuals who had orchestrated the disappearance and then silenced dissent by burying evidence under layers of bureaucratic obfuscation. The more she gathered, the clearer it was that her family's vanishing was not a random act of fate, but part of a larger plot to protect secrets that could potentially shake the foundations of high society and commerce. Now, armed with damning documents, eyewitness testimonies, and the heartfelt account of a veteran sailor, Alice prepared to confront the hidden forces behind the tragedy. In quiet moments, as she scanned each line of redacted text and listened to the final, trembling confession of a witness, she felt that the storm within her was finally gathering the force necessary to demand justice. Every sleepless night and every desperate phone call now served a purpose: to unravel a web of lies that had robbed her of Thomas and Bella. And as the pieces of this dangerous puzzle began to fall into place, Alice knew that her journey was far from over. The dark secrets scribbled in outdated memos and whispered in forgotten corridors were calling her to expose the truth. A truth that those in power had hidden for too long. Armed with a mountain of damning evidence and the testimonies of reluctant insiders, Alice Morgan finally reached the point where silence was no longer an option. The relentless pursuit of truth had taken her from the cold corridors of forgotten archives to the murky depths of clandestine safe havens. Now, the time had come to bring the shocking discoveries into the public light, even if doing so meant endangering her own life. Late one rainy evening in her modest New York apartment, Alice sat before a battered laptop surrounded by neatly organized stacks of photocopied documents, redacted memos, handwritten notes, and the sailor's trembling testimony recorded on an old digital voice recorder. The evidence detailed a dark conspiracy that stretched far beyond a single overlooked technical malfunction on the cruise liner the Sapphire Queen. It implicated high-ranking corporate and governmental figures who had manipulated ship logs, suppressed security footage, and orchestrated the disappearance of her husband, Thomas, and daughter, Bella. Every anomaly, every discrepancy in the official records, had built a case so meticulously entwined with deceit that it could challenge the very foundations of those powerful interests. Driven by both heartbreak and a fierce determination to reclaim her family's legacy, Alice began assembling her final exposé. She contacted a trusted investigative journalist from a renowned national news outlet who had a reputation for unearthing hidden truths. Under the alias Morgan Blake, she arranged secret meetings in dimly lit cafes and vacant industrial spaces beneath the unyielding glow of street lamps. Over several days, Alice laid out her case. The inexplicable shutdown of the cruise liner's cameras during the period of the disappearance, the suspicious internal memos detailing package deliveries that, in hushed jargon, referred to the removal of evidence and individuals, and the verified testimonies that suggested influential figures had collaborated to bury the tragedy deep within bureaucratic neglect. The investigative journalist, whose eyes widened with every new revelation, assured her that her story had all the makings of a major scandal. With the journalist's backing, Alice released the first wave of her meticulously compiled report online, complete with scanned documents, transcribed interviews, and carefully dated photographs of maritime inspection logs. The report was one of those explosive revelations that the public rarely forgets. Within hours, the story spread like wildfire across social media, blogs, and even in mainstream news bulletins. Headlines screamed of mysterious disappearances at sea and conspiracy in the Caribbean, the long-hidden truth behind a family's tragedy. For the first time in 7 shattering years, Alice felt that her lost loved ones were being vindicated by a chorus of public outrage. However, as soon as the exposé broke through the digital sphere, ominous signs of retribution began to manifest. That same night, just before dawn, Alice answered a phone call from an unknown number. The voice on the other end was modulated, cold, detached, and laced with a quiet threat. "Ms. Morgan, this is a warning. Consider this your only chance to retract your statements. You have endangered people you do not understand. Cease your inquiries immediately." The line went dead before she could ask any questions. The call chilled her to the core, but it also steeled her resolve further. The conspiracy was deeper and more dangerous than she had imagined, and those with the most to lose were desperate enough to silence her permanently. The following day, as Alice prepared for a public press conference arranged by the news outlet to discuss her findings, she discovered evidence that she was not alone in receiving these threats. Anonymous letters arrived at her door, crumpled pages folded with meticulous care. In one letter, threats and veiled promises to make her disappear were scrawled in hurried, jagged handwriting along with a single symbol, an insignia that she recognized from one of the redacted memos. A second message, delivered by an unfamiliar courier at dusk, warned her in equally chilling terms, "The truth you seek is dangerous. We advise you to keep silent if you value your life and the lives of those around you." The press conference itself was held in a modest, rented auditorium far removed from the glitzy boardrooms and polished halls of power. A sparse crowd of journalists, activists, and curious onlookers filled the room. Alice took to the stage with her face marked by both exhaustion and unyielding determination. The layered grief of 7 bitter years was etched onto her features. Her eyes, however, burned with the fire of a woman who refused to let injustice prevail. Before a mesmerized audience, she recounted her story, carefully, methodically, imparting every detail of the mysterious disappearance, every inconsistency in the official reports, and the chilling testimony of insiders, including the stark admission of crew members who had tried desperately to warn someone of the impending cover-up. At first, the room was silent except for the soft hum of the projector and the rustle of notepads. Then came a ripple of murmurs. The calculated delivery of evidence, combined with the raw emotion in Alice's voice, painted a picture so damning that even the most skeptical listeners were forced to re-examine their own complicity in ignoring inconvenient truths. Yet, as she finished her exposé, a palpable shift occurred, the realization that with such revelations, she had irrevocably stepped into a battle against those who wield immense power. After the conference, while media vans and reporters buzzed outside, Alice found herself approached by several individuals. Some offered tearful support and promises of assistance, while others warned her in quiet, urgent tones to remain vigilant. Among them was one man, an off-duty investigator with contacts in law enforcement, who confided that agents linked to a secret organization had been dispatched to keep tabs on anyone disrupting the status quo. "Be careful," he whispered. "They don't hesitate to erase inconvenient testimonies forever." These words echoed in Alice's mind as she left the auditorium, the cool night air filled with the palpable danger that now surrounded her. That very night, as she returned to her apartment, where every shadow seemed to whisper threats, Alice felt the full force of being marked as an enemy of the powerful. The chain of events had set into motion a response from those who aimed to suppress the truth at any cost. Her phone buzzed incessantly with frantic messages and anonymous warnings. Suddenly, she realized that nothing in her life would ever be the same. The forces determined to hold secrets in their grasp were now mobilized against her. Yet, even in the face of such ominous threats, Alice refused to back down. As she gathered her evidence once more, securing backups and arranging for discreet safe houses suggested by sympathetic allies, she squared her shoulders and made a silent promise. The truth would prevail, no matter the price. With every new threat, her determination only deepened. In that instant, as the weight of her recent revelations pressed against her chest, Alice stepped forward into a dangerous, uncertain future. Armed with evidence, bolstered by courage, and driven by a burning need to reunite her lost family and expose the conspiracy that had stolen them away. In the weeks that followed the explosive public exposé, New York was alight with outrage and tumult. The story of the mysterious disappearance aboard the Sapphire Queen, the day that had stolen Thomas and Bella from Alice Morgan, had morphed from a tragic anomaly into a full-scale scandal. As media outlets, investigative agencies, and congressional committees began to unravel the layers of deceit, whispers of a powerful conspiracy reached a fever pitch. But it wasn't only the dark corridors of government or high finance that were in uproar. Alice's own life was now enmeshed in a battle for survival. The threatening calls and anonymous warnings were intensifying, echoing in every sleepless hour. With each passing day, it became clear that those who had long protected their secrets would pull out all the stops to keep their influence intact. Under cover of darkness, and with the adrenaline of desperation pounding in her veins, Alice arranged one final, decisive move. Guided by the intelligence of sympathetic allies, the off-duty investigator she'd met during the press conference, a small cluster of former crew members of the Sapphire Queen, and outspoken civil rights advocates now emboldened by her revelations, she prepared to extract Thomas and Bella from the claustrophobic, heavily monitored shelter where they had been confined. The shelter itself, once a somber refuge hidden among decaying buildings in the heart of the city, had become a prison of enforced silence where the conspirators' influence held sway. Inside, Thomas remained distant and subdued, and Bella's vacant eyes betrayed little recognition of the loving mother they once had known. Yet beneath those guarded expressions, Alice sensed buried fragments of who they had been, a spark of the warmth and love that had been stolen from her. On a rain-slicked evening, as fog crept along the pavement and the city's neon glare blurred into ghostly halos, Alice's allies mobilized. In a discreet rendezvous at an abandoned warehouse on the edge of the docks, a trusted driver with secure transport awaited. There, a hushed urgency passed between them. The plan was simple yet perilous. Extract Thomas and Bella from the shelter under the cover of the coming storm, and then vanish into a network of safe houses arranged by activists and independent investigators. The driver's eyes, hard and determined, promised them a rapid escape, one that would allow evidence of the conspiracy to be conveyed to federal authorities while ensuring that they remained one step ahead of the forces determined to silence them. Within the confines of the shelter, as midnight deepened, Alice returned under the cloak of darkness. In the quiet, oppressive stillness of that hidden refuge, she found Thomas sitting slumped beside the threadbare sofa and Bella curled on a faded rug, the little girl's hand still clutching the battered doll with the embroidered initials BM. It was the same doll that had ignited a tumultuous hope 7 years ago, a symbol of a past that refused to fade. With trembling yet resolute hands, Alice approached them. "Thomas, Bella?" she whispered, her voice laden with fierce determination and the echo of maternal love. For a long, agonizing moment, they sat in silence. Slowly, as if a dam had broken within them, faint signs of recognition stirred. Thomas's eyes, filled with despair and guarded hope, met hers. Bella's gaze flickered, uncertain but tender, as if she was being pulled, bit by bit, from a deep, imposed amnesia. The extraction was a scene of both chaos and resolute calm. With urgency, Alice signaled to her allies outside. The driver's van roared to life as they navigated narrow, rain-drenched backstreets, leaving behind the oppressive confines of the shelter. Behind them, the sounds of frantic voices and splintering glass hinted at the conspirators' attempts to intercept their escape. The driver sped along deserted avenues, the city blurring by in streaks of rain and neon. In the cramped interior of the van, silence reigned for a few tense minutes as Thomas clenched his fists on his lap and Bella, still clutching her doll, stared out the window as if trying to memorize every detail of the night that had changed all their lives. Alice sat in the front, her eyes on the rearview mirror reflecting a mix of exhaustion and fierce hope. In that mirror, she saw not just her own determined face but the faces of her loved ones, reminders of who they had been and who they could become again. Even as they fled, the dangerous specter of retribution loomed. Phone calls threatened dire consequences, and anonymous messages warned that powerful entities would stop at nothing to bury this truth. A network of shadowy enforcers, deployed by influential figures implicated in the cover-up, began moving in the periphery. Yet, Armed with leaked documents from her earlier exposé, and bolstered by an angry, united public demanding accountability, Alice was no longer alone. Federal agents, spurred into action by the mounting evidence and indefatigable advocacy of whistleblowers, had begun a parallel investigation. News flashes and breaking reports declared that a secret organization, rumored to have been safeguarding hidden crimes for decades, was now under the lens of law enforcement scrutiny. In the temporary safety of one of the underground safe houses, a nondescript apartment in a modest neighborhood away from the corrupt centers of power, Alice, Thomas, and Bella gathered. The space was sparse but fortified by the support of a community that believed in justice. Here, while the storm outside raged, they finally allowed themselves a moment of quiet reflection. Thomas, his voice rough and laden with the burden of years spent in enforced silence, began to murmur fragments of his experience. Vague accounts of shadowy figures, forced separations, and subtle manipulations that had robbed him of his memories. Even, perhaps, his ability to fully love again. Bella, once the vibrant child full of life and wonder, clutched her doll as if it were the last remnant of her innocence. Though her recollections were fragmented and shadowed by years of imposed oblivion, there were moments, fleeting and fragile, when her eyes shone with recognition and longing. In that fragile space between danger and hope, Alice resolved to tell their story. Every document, every eyewitness account, every recorded conversation was now destined to join in a final public revelation. In the coming days, she would work with her allies to broadcast the truth to the world. That the disappearance of Thomas and Bella had not been an accident, but a meticulously orchestrated act by powerful figures intent on silencing inconvenient truths. The public exposure would be a clarion call for justice, a defiant declaration that the lives of innocents could no longer be sacrificed for the profit of the few. But even as the plan for full disclosure unfolded, Alice knew that the journey ahead would remain perilous. The conspirators, now cornered and desperate, would stop at nothing to quash the revelations. The safe house was but a brief respite. The danger lurked just beyond the window, in the digital networks of secret agencies and corrupt officials. And yet, for the first time in 7 long years, the 3 survivors had a spark of hope. They were no longer defined solely by their losses and the oppressive weight of a dark conspiracy. Instead, they were beginning to forge a new identity together, a return to a family that, though scarred by tragedy, was united by love, resilience, and the undeniable strength of truth. As dawn crept over New York's skyline the next day, Alice looked out from the safe house's small window and silently vowed that they would not retreat into the shadows of despair any longer. The truth, though dangerous, had been set free. Now, in the uncertain light of a new morning, she and her recovered family prepared to stand before the world, knowing full well that in their unity lay the power to change everything. The world would never be the same again. She had lost them forever, or so she believed, until an unexpected glimpse unlocked a secret concealed for years. Subscribe if you believe that the truth always finds a way, however dark the path may be.